not the first, he's not the first, but he's the second best secret agent in the whole wide world. Not number one, but not the worst. He's just the second best secret agent in the whole wide world. He's every bit as good as what's his name, with a dame.
Today we're talking to author Harlan Wolff. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, if we can just start with a little bit about who you are and your background. I understand you, prior to becoming a novelist, you used to be a private investigator.
Yeah, since the mid-90s.
Okay, so you probably have a few interesting, to say the least, stories about that. Are there any that you can share?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, it's like telling very long jokes. Yeah, what have we done? Worked for a lot of law firms. Most of what we did was corporate work and criminal cases. Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult to talk about because a lot of it is, of course, confidential.
Absolutely. How did you get involved with it? I mean, how does one become a private investigator?
Well, that's a long story, but I'll try. Okay. A friend of mine, who I met here in the 80s, was the UK's most famous private detective in the 1960s. He even ended up working for people like the Great Train Robbers, but he ended up proving they were guilty and therefore resigned from the case. Very interesting character. He's dead now, unfortunately, but very interesting character indeed. And back in the 80s, when he first arrived in Thailand, he had left England under a bit of a cloud because he got so big that Parliament started to hold meetings about whether it was right for somebody to have a private army in the UK. He had thousands and thousands of people working for him. And he came to Thailand and went into the food business, and of course missed his old life so much that when his ex-employees, who had set up their own firms in the UK, would contact him and say, "We hear you're in Bangkok, boss, and are you still in the game?" He would, of course, lie to them and say, "Yes, absolutely," he wasn't. And I was the only person he knew who was somewhat streetwise and spoke Thai fluently. So he would come to me and say, "This is going to be fun, trust me, let's do this." And so I had about 3 cases in the 80s, which were, I didn't see myself as a private detective, but they were very lucrative, and we had a lot of fun, and we had a few beers afterwards. So mid-90s, when I was trying to work out what to do with the next bit of my life, it suddenly struck me that why not just print a name card that says private detective and start telling people. And, well, as they say, the rest is history.
Excellent. So what brought you to Thailand in the first place?
I was 16 years old, maybe turning 17, it's hard to remember. I bought a one-way ticket on Bangladesh Airlines. That I bought the ticket on Earls Court railway station in a wooden bucket shop, and decided this was going to be my launch pad to a worldwide adventure. Of course, having no idea that I was unemployable when I got here, I arrived without much money in my pocket. Could not have got a job for love nor money, legally. I didn't qualify at that age, and certainly wasn't going to school and couldn't afford to eat. So I just got stuck here.
So you came and just never left.
Just never left. I ran out of money very quickly. Didn't have much to begin with. Was at one time 7 years overstayed on my visa. Was probably Thailand's most wanted expatriate offender in those days. There weren't many of us here. And yeah, I've been here ever since.
And so, what then led to you writing your first novel?
Yeah, it's a strange thing. Ever since my mother's Swedish, my Swedish grandfather was a famous writer in Sweden. He was a war correspondent with the Swedish newspapers during the Second World War, and after the war he went very existentialist, but people wanted happy stuff after the Second World War, so nobody really read him. So he spent the rest of his life as a writer of children's books, and he's still quite well known in Sweden, especially amongst the older people. And ever since I was a child, I've always had this idea that somehow I was supposed to be a writer, and I've always read a lot. And then I told myself I have to wait until I've got something to write about, so let's go out there and live a little and we'll write further down the road. It started at maybe I'll write at 30, and then it was, well, maybe 40 is the right age. And finally at 50, I said, okay, enough's enough. It's time to get on with it. And then that was it.
So I imagine being in Bangkok and Thailand, it gives you quite a lot of inspiration.
Yeah. It's difficult though. It's very difficult because you've always got to take into consideration somebody, especially somebody who's lived here as long as me and has done the things that I've done, that people won't think it's real. So one of the hardest things is to take what I perceive as a reality of Thailand and then translate it into something which people will say, yes, I accept that, that's possible and I can see that happening. I actually crave maybe writing about somewhere else.
Oh, that's interesting.
After a couple of books, I might take my character and send him somewhere wonderful like Vienna and have him investigate a crime in the Thai community in Vienna or something.
So, for those who are not familiar with your work, tell us a little bit more about your writing style and genre.
Well, the genre is a fictional private detective who just happens to be middle-aged and quite cynical. And the style, I don't know how I would describe the style. I was never formally taught creative writing, so what I did was I imagined myself talking to somebody and telling a story. It's much easier when you're writing because, of course, you go back and edit. But I imagined it as if I was talking and tried to write it in a way that I would feel comfortable telling somebody.
And so what's Bangkok Rules actually about then?
Well, my youth here was full of very, very colourful characters. Quite a few of them are based on real people, but not in a real situation. So the villain is an ex-CIA officer from Vietnam who has come back to Thailand in the 90s and is a serial killer.
Right.
And he, of course, has lots of ties with his old friends in the Thai military from the days when he was in the CIA, which helps him to evade the law. We have alcoholic journalists, have to include at least one of those. Dutch antiques dealers, your average barflies, just about everybody I could imagine that I had seen and was very memorable to me, I tried to include them in the book.
So going back on one of the points that you made earlier, that you actually find it quite difficult to write about Bangkok and whether people will actually accept what you're saying or not.
Well, listen, it's got my bit of Bangkok because I didn't live the normal lifestyle. I mean, I wouldn't attempt to write about what it would be like to be an executive in a computer company in Bangkok because I have no idea. But my little corner I'm quite familiar with.
Okay. We've noticed there are actually quite a number of books based in Bangkok and Thailand. There's quite a few authors who write about various characters living here. But given that you say you actually find it quite difficult to write about sort of the Bangkok that you know, what is it about Bangkok that you think makes it such a popular place to write about?
I think it's the same thing as brings so many tourists. I think it's a fascinating place. I think I don't really have the stars in my eyes anymore. I've been here so long, I'm more like a Thai. I look at Europe and think it's wonderful and I can't wait to go there on holiday. But to people that live in places like England and Australia and Germany, they find Thailand absolutely fascinating.
Certainly is an interesting place. We've also noticed over the last couple of years there seems to be more and more people moving here permanently. Is that something that you've noticed, or have you got any ideas why that might be?
I think it's different people. I think we see, especially during periods of turmoil like we're seeing now, the expats that have been here for a long, long time, we always see the people leaving. It's part of living in Thailand is you make friends and then they're not there anymore, which becomes very frustrating. So as you get older, you have a tendency to make less friends and be a little bit difficult to approach. But what we don't see, of course, is the new people coming in because we're not familiar with those and we don't really see them until they've been here a while. So I'm sure there's lots of new people coming in, but there's also lots leaving.
So with regards to that, obviously we're both in Bangkok at the moment and Bangkok's been hitting the news worldwide due to the protests and the shutdown. How are you actually finding it? Has the shutdown affected you personally at all, your day-to-day life?
Not really in day-to-day life. I mean, apart from worrying about kids going to school and university and things, and the areas that they have to cross on their way there. In fact, there was a period of 2 weeks when I kept everybody at home because we just weren't sure how it was going to go. But emotionally, I think it's having a huge effect on people. I think people are very frustrated. I think a lot of people are getting depressed. You don't notice it because everyone else is in the same boat, but it's certainly having a huge effect on people.
Do you think it's having an effect on tourism as well?
Oh, it's huge. And maybe we haven't even seen it yet because, of course, lots of the people that are coming here now, it's because they prepaid their holidays and they can't get a refund. But who's booking right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was really interesting. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you very much for having me.